What would you have done in this situation? Was justice served? Or did Lisa get off too easy? We want to hear your thoughts. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if you don't want to miss our next incredible story dropping tomorrow, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust us, it's one you won't forget. Hit that like button if you believe actions have consequences. And we'll see you in the next story. Royal Guard stays still after being slapped, but watch what happens next. The midday sun cast a golden glow over Buckingham Palace, its towering gates gleaming as a sea of tourists gathered outside. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. This was a chance to witness the legendary King's Guard, the soldiers known for their unwavering discipline. Cameras clicked, whispers spread, and eyes fixated on the motionless figures, standing tall in their pristine red tunics and black bearskin hats. Among the crowd stood Lisa Montgomery, a 45-year-old woman from Los Angeles, California. With perfectly styled blonde hair and oversized designer sunglasses, she exuded an air of superiority. She had come to London expecting royal grandeur, but now, standing in the crowd, she felt nothing but impatience. Her arms were crossed, her expensive handbag dangling from her wrist as she tapped her foot against the cobblestone pavement. Lisa scoffed, shaking her head. Seriously? They just stand there? What's the big deal? She muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her husband, John Montgomery, a composed businessman in his 50s, gave her a weary glance. Lisa, let's just enjoy the moment, he said, his voice low, already sensing where this was going. But Lisa wasn't the type to be ignored. Her eyes locked onto Officer Anthony Brooks, a 6'2" black soldier in his mid-30s, standing just a few feet away. His uniform was immaculate, his polished boots reflecting the sunlight. He was the embodiment of discipline, his gaze unflinching, his posture rigid. A smirk played on Lisa's lips. "Oh, so you think you're too good to acknowledge me?" she taunted, stepping closer. The crowd around her grew quiet, sensing the shift in energy. Some tourists exchanged uneasy glances, while others instinctively reached for their phones, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Lisa waved a manicured hand in front of Officer Brooks' face. No reaction. He remained completely still, as if carved from stone. Her smirk faded into irritation. "Unbelievable," she muttered. And then, in an instant, she did the unthinkable. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, the sound of the slap echoing like a crack of thunder in the silence. People froze, their eyes darting between Lisa and the guard, waiting for a reaction. But Officer Brooks didn't flinch. He didn't move. Lisa, however, had just made the biggest mistake of her life. And karma? Karma was about to strike back. Hard. The slap echoed through the crowd, a sharp, shocking sound that seemed to freeze time. For a split second, Buckingham Palace's usually lively surroundings fell into complete silence. All eyes locked onto Lisa Montgomery, the woman who had just struck an on-duty King's Guard. But what happened next was even more unsettling. Officer Anthony Brooks did not move. His face remained as still as stone, his gaze locked forward, unwavering in his discipline. He had been trained for this, trained to withstand taunts, distractions, even physical provocation. No matter what, the King's Guard never reacted. Lisa, expecting some kind of response, anger, shock, maybe even an order to leave, felt a flicker of confusion. "Oh, so you're just going to stand there?" she scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "That's right. You people are trained like dogs, aren't you?" The murmurs in the crowd turned into sharp whispers of disapproval. A young woman, holding up her phone to record, shook her head. "Did she really just say that?" A man in a navy blue jacket leaned over to his friend. "This lady is insane. You don't mess with the King's Guard." Lisa's husband, John Montgomery, had gone pale. He grabbed her wrist, his voice low and urgent. "Lisa, enough. You're making a scene." But Lisa yanked her hand away. "I don't care. I paid for this trip. I have the right to interact with them however I want." That was it. The energy in the crowd shifted. People weren't just watching anymore. They were judging. And then a new voice cut through the murmurs. "Ma'am." Lisa's head snapped toward the source. A second soldier had stepped forward, slightly shorter than Officer Brooks, but equally imposing. Sergeant Daniel Carter, a high-ranking member of the Guard, stood with perfect posture, his voice calm but commanding. Step back, immediately. Lisa let out a short laugh. Oh, now someone talks? What's the matter? Is he not allowed to speak for himself? She sneered, jabbing a finger toward Officer Brooks. Before she could say another word, a deeper, stronger voice interrupted. That's enough. The crowd parted instinctively as a uniformed officer approached briskly. His navy blue jacket bore an insignia of rank, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto Lisa's with unwavering authority. The golden nameplate on his chest read, Inspector Michael Wallace. He stopped directly in front of Lisa. Ma'am, what you just did was assault on an active duty serviceman of the King's Guard. Lisa's smug expression faltered. Assault? Oh, please, it was just a slap, she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. It's not like he's hurt. He's trained for worse, isn't he? Inspector Wallace didn't blink. Ma'am, whether or not you perceive it as harmless is irrelevant, he said, his voice even but firm. You just physically struck a member of the military while he was on duty. That is a criminal offense. The crowd gasped. Lisa's confidence flickered, her mouth opening slightly. Wait, what? Inspector Wallace's expression didn't change. You are under investigation for assaulting a serviceman. We have multiple witnesses and footage of the incident. If you do not cooperate, this will escalate into an arrest. Lisa turned to her husband, expecting him to step in, but John only let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. Lisa, I warned you. Lisa could feel it now, the shift in power. The eyes of the crowd, the judgment, the flashing cameras. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And karma? Karma was just getting started. Lisa Montgomery stood frozen, the weight of Inspector Wallace's words settling in like a crushing force. A criminal offense, an investigation, possible arrest. Her mind raced, her confidence slipping as fast as the murmurs around her grew louder. You can't be serious, she scoffed, forcing a laugh. All this over a tiny slap? Inspector Wallace remained unshaken. Ma'am, this is not up for debate. Assaulting a King's Guard is a serious offense under UK law. You will be held accountable for your actions. Lisa's smirk disappeared. For the first time, she realized this wasn't going away. The crowd had fully turned against her now. Dozens of people had their phones up, capturing every second. Her face, her words, her downfall. A man in a gray hoodie stepped forward, raising his phone. I got it all on video. If you need it, officer, I can send the footage. Lisa's stomach dropped. She whirled around, her voice sharp with panic. You can't do that. That's illegal. You're violating my privacy. The young man raised an eyebrow. Lady, we're in public. You didn't seem to mind when you were acting like a royal pain in the ass. The crowd laughed. Lisa clenched her fists. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Inspector Wallace's radio crackled, a voice coming through from security inside the palace. We have confirmation from CCTV. The assault is verified. Proceed as necessary. Lisa's heart pounded. She could feel the walls closing in. Wallace nodded at his officers. Ma'am, you will now be escorted for further questioning. If you resist, you will be taken into custody. Lisa's pulse raced. The flashing cameras, the murmuring voices, the way John had stepped away from her, all of it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her husband's voice cut through the noise. Lisa, John said, shaking his head, his tone quiet but firm. You brought this on yourself, Lisa snapped toward him. You're supposed to be on my side? John sighed heavily. What do you want me to say, Lisa? That this isn't your fault? He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I told you to stop. You didn't listen. The crowd watched in fascination. Some whispered to each other. Others openly recorded her unraveling. And then the final blow came. A teenage boy cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Boo!" The crowd erupted, boos, laughter, jeering. Lisa's face burned red. People were enjoying her downfall. She gritted her teeth, trying to ignore them, but the words stung. This is what happens when you act entitled. Karma's coming in full force. Hope she likes internet fame. A woman in a business suit turned to her friend. She's done for. This is going viral. Lisa's stomach twisted. She wasn't just facing legal trouble. Her reputation was about to be shredded worldwide. Inside the security office at Buckingham Palace, Lisa Montgomery sat stiffly in a small chair, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow over the stark, windowless room. Her heart was still pounding from the chaos outside. The crowd's jeers, the flashing cameras, the public humiliation, it all played in her head like a nightmare on repeat. Across from her, Inspector Michael Wallace sat with a clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. He was calm, collected, and completely in control. Lisa, for the first time in her life, was not. "Mrs. Montgomery," Wallace began, his voice even but firm. "Let's go over what happened." Lisa clenched her jaw. "I was just trying to get a reaction," she muttered. "It was a joke." Wallace raised an eyebrow. "A joke?" He flipped through the statements already gathered. "You struck an on-duty serviceman in front of dozens of witnesses, multiple cameras, and palace security. That's not a joke, ma'am. That's assault." Lisa huffed, shifting in her seat. "Oh, come on. It wasn't that serious. I barely touched him." Wallace remained unmoved. "That's not for you to decide." He set his clipboard down, folding his hands together. "Here's the situation. We have CCTV footage, eyewitness accounts, and recorded videos from the public. You could be formally charged, which may result in a fine, community service, or even a ban from the UK." Lisa's stomach dropped. "A ban?" Wallace nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The British government does not take assaults on servicemen lightly." Lisa's pulse quickened. This was getting worse by the second. She glanced at John, hoping for support, but he only shook his head, arms crossed, his disappointment almost suffocating. "There is one alternative," Wallace said finally. Lisa snapped her gaze back to him. "What?" He exchanged a glance with another officer before continuing. "Officer Brooks himself has offered you a way out. He has chosen not to press charges on one condition." Lisa leaned forward. "What condition?" "A public apology." Lisa blinked. "Excuse me?" "You will go outside, stand in front of the crowd, and issue a sincere public apology. No excuses, no justifications. You take responsibility, or we proceed with charges." Lisa's breath hitched. Humiliate herself again? The thought made her stomach churn, but the alternative, fines, a criminal record, possibly never being allowed back in the UK? She swallowed hard, her hands balling into fists. She had no choice. With a shaky breath, she muttered through gritted teeth, "Fine." Inspector Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Louder, Mrs. Montgomery." Lisa clenched her jaw, humiliation washing over her. "I'll do it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Wallace nodded, standing up. "Then let's go." As Lisa rose from her chair, her legs felt like lead. The door opened, revealing the path back to the very place where she had lost control. And now she was about to face the world once again. Lisa Montgomery stepped back onto the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, her stomach twisting into knots as she faced the crowd once again. The same people who had watched her arrogance just moments ago were now waiting for something else. Her downfall, her regret, her apology. The murmurs rippled through the air. Some whispered, some laughed, but most stood with their phones raised, ready to record every second. Lisa's face burned. Inspector Michael Wallace stood beside her. His posture was firm, his presence demanding. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "you may begin." Lisa swallowed hard, her throat dry, her hands clenched at her sides. She had never been forced to apologize for anything in her life. She took a shaky breath. I want to apologize for my actions today," she started, her voice trembling. "I let my frustration get the better of me, and I disrespected a soldier who was simply doing his job." The crowd fell silent, listening. Lisa hesitated, the shame pressing down on her like a crushing weight. She turned toward Officer Anthony Brooks, who still stood at attention, completely unreadable. "What I did was wrong," she forced out, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I understand that now." The moment stretched on. She had never felt so exposed, so powerless. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Lisa's head snapped up. A young man in a gray hoodie, the same one who had recorded her earlier, nodded slightly as he clapped. Another person joined in, then another. The applause wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't cheering. It was acknowledgement. A quiet acceptance that she had done the bare minimum, taken responsibility. Lisa felt her face burn hotter. Inspector Wallace turned to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. You are free to leave. Lisa exhaled, shaky and weak. She turned on her heel, desperate to get away from the scene of her greatest humiliation. As she walked through the gates, John was already ahead of her. He hadn't said a word during the apology. At the hotel that night, Lisa lay staring at the weight of the day settling in. She didn't need to check her phone to know she was viral. And tomorrow, the entire world would be watching. Pow. What do you think? Was this justice served? Or did Lisa get off too easy? If you were in this situation, how do you think you would have reacted? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. We're always amazed to see how far our stories reach. Do you think Lisa truly learned her lesson? Or was she just apologizing to save herself? Have you ever witnessed a moment where karma struck instantly? Maybe you've seen someone face the consequences of their own arrogance. Tell us your stories. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life moments of justice, redemption, and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. A brand new story drops tomorrow, and trust us, you won't want to miss this one. Now, drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, and let's get the conversation started.